I stood frozen on the tarmac, luggage still in hand, as my husband James smiled coldly from the private jet stairs. "Only family is allowed on this trip, Celia." The board members behind him averted their eyes, except for April from marketing, whose smirk was unmistakable. 6 years of marriage, 4 years building his company, and countless nights developing the software that saved his business had apparently made me nothing more than an employee. I nodded calmly and walked away. Little did James know, I still held the master key to everything he valued. I met James Miller at a tech conference in San Francisco 7 years ago. At 30, I was already making waves in Silicon Valley with dual degrees from Stanford and MIT. After cutting my teeth at several startups, I'd landed a coveted senior developer position at Google, leading a team creating new data integration protocols. My future looked bright, secure, and entirely my own. James was presenting his struggling startup, Tech Fusion, to a half-empty conference room. What he lacked in technical depth, he made up for in vision and charisma. While others saw a failing company, I glimpsed potential in his concept for unified business systems. When he fumbled explaining the technical architecture, I asked questions that helped clarify his points to the audience. He found me afterward, buying me coffee as thanks. That coffee turned into dinner, and dinner evolved into the most intense connection I'd ever experienced. James was ambitious, charming, and seemed genuinely awed by my technical knowledge. Within 8 months, we were married in a small ceremony at his parents' home in Connecticut. "We'll build something revolutionary together," he promised on our wedding night. "Your brilliance and my business sense. We're unstoppable as a team." The reality of Tech Fusion proved sobering. When I left Google to join James, the company was nearly bankrupt, with only 6 months of operating capital remaining. His original technical co-founder had departed over creative differences, leaving behind a patchwork of incompatible systems. The staff consisted of 4 demoralized developers and an office manager who doubled as the receptionist. "I know it looks bad," James admitted as he showed me around the Spartan office space. "But with you here, everything changes." Those words would prove more prophetic than either of us realized. For 3 weeks, I immersed myself in their existing technology stack, mapping its weaknesses. The inspiration struck during a late-night coding session, Nexus, a revolutionary integrative platform that could seamlessly connect disparate business systems into one unified interface. It would be elegant, powerful, and unlike anything on the market. "This could save the company," I told James, sketching the architecture on our kitchen whiteboard at 2 in the morning. "It'll take months of intensive development, but it solves exactly the problem your clients are facing." James stared at my diagrams, then grabbed me in a fierce hug. "My brilliant wife, I knew you'd find the way forward." For the next 8 months, I coded day and night. Our apartment became my war room, walls covered in flowcharts and sticky notes. I ate meals at my keyboard, often forgetting to sleep until James gently pried me away from the screen. Meanwhile, he handled the business side, keeping investors at bay, managing the skeletal staff, and maintaining relationships with our few existing clients. When Nexus finally launched, it exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The software was revolutionary in its simplicity and power. Our small client base was astonished. Word spread quickly, and within 6 months, Tech Fusion transformed from struggling startup to industry darling. In those early glory days, James never failed to introduce me as my brilliant wife and partner, the architect behind Nexus. I'd blush at the praise but secretly treasured the recognition. We were truly building our dream together. As Tech Fusion grew, so did our staff. 10 employees became 20, then 50. We moved from our cramped startup space to sleek offices in downtown San Francisco. James thrived as the CEO, charming investors and clients alike. I continued refining Nexus, leading a growing development team while maintaining the core architecture myself. The shift happened so gradually I barely noticed it beginning. First, James started introducing me simply as Celia, one of our senior developers. When I mentioned it, he laughed. People get confused by too many details. The important thing is that we know what you've built. At company celebrations, his speeches increasingly referred to Nexus as my vision rather than our creation. My role in the story seemed to shrink with each retelling. At home, James worked later and later, his excitement about sharing developments with me noticeably diminishing. Then came the strange moments. James quickly switching screens when I entered his office, whispered conversations with the new marketing director that stopped when I approached, invitations to key meetings that mysteriously disappeared from my calendar. I tried to dismiss my concerns as paranoia born from exhaustion. We were both under immense pressure as the company scaled, but the evidence became harder to ignore. While searching for a technical document in our company server, I stumbled upon investor presentations where my contribution to Nexus was first minimized, then completely omitted. The final confirmation came when I received a press release draft from a junior marketing employee seeking technical review. The release announced our upcoming expansion and described Nexus as the brainchild of CEO James Miller, whose innovative approach to business integration has disrupted the industry. There was no mention of me at all. I stared at my screen, reading those words over and over until they blurred. The software I'd created line by line, the late nights and sacrificed weekends, the architecture that had flowed from my mind and hands, all credited to my husband as though I'd never existed. Something fundamental had shifted, and I could no longer pretend otherwise. The partner who had once proudly championed my brilliance was systematically erasing me from my own creation. "We need to talk about the press release," I said that evening, setting a plate of pasta in front of James. I'd cooked his favorite bucatini with pancetta and pecorino, hoping good food might ease a difficult conversation. He barely glanced up from his phone. "What press release?" "The one about the expansion. The one that says, 'You created Nexus.'" James twirled pasta around his fork, still scrolling through emails. "It's just marketing, Celia. Investors respond better to a consistent narrative. One visionary, one clear story. But it's not true. We both know I created Nexus." He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of impatience and condescension. "I provided the vision. You did the coding. It's simpler this way." "Simpler to erase me completely?" "Don't be dramatic." His tone sharpened. "You're still getting paid exceptionally well. The company acknowledges your technical contributions internally. Not everyone needs public recognition." The cold calculation in his voice stunned me into silence. This wasn't my husband speaking, or perhaps it was, and I'd been blind to who he truly was all along. The following weeks brought more systematic changes. My longtime team members were reassigned to different projects, replaced by new hires who had no knowledge of my role in creating Nexus. My requests for information about upcoming product plans were met with vague responses or outright deflection. Most tellingly, my office was relocated from the executive floor to the general development area during a weekend when I was visiting my parents. I returned to find my belongings moved without notice. My new space, half the size of my previous one, wedged between junior developers who'd been at the company less than 6 months. "It's about team integration," James explained when confronted. "We need you closer to the development staff. It's actually a promotion. You're overseeing more people now." But my new title, Technical Implementation Manager, was clearly a demotion from my previous role as Chief Technology Officer. Even more concerning, I discovered my access to certain parts of the Nexus codebase had been restricted. "Security protocols," the IT director explained nervously when I demanded answers. "Orders from above. Need, to, no basis for different system components." I was being locked out of my own creation. At home, tension grew. James worked increasingly late, often not returning until after midnight. When present, he was distracted and irritable, turning simple questions about his day into accusations that I was monitoring him. "You don't trust me to run my own company," he snapped one night after I asked about a major client meeting I'd been excluded from. "Your company?" I echoed, the words hanging between us like a wall. "I thought it was our company." He didn't respond, just grabbed his keys and left. He didn't come home that night. The company holiday party in December marked a new low. Held at an exclusive club overlooking the bay, it showcased Tech Fusion's meteoric rise. I wore a new dress, hoping to recapture some connection with James, who had been particularly distant that week. Standing at the podium, champagne in hand, he thanked key team members and major clients. When he spoke about Nexus, his words cut deep. "When I first envisioned Nexus 4 years ago, people said it couldn't be done. But I knew what businesses needed before they did." He smiled as applause rippled through the room. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from seeing possibilities others miss. I maintained my composure, smiling mechanically as colleagues congratulated my husband on his brilliant creation. April Jensen, the new marketing director, stood constantly at his side, her hand occasionally touching his arm, in a gesture that seemed too familiar. Only Sam Walker, one of our early investors and now a board member, seemed to notice my isolation. A quiet, observant man in his 50s, Sam approached during a rare moment when I stood alone. "You built Nexus, didn't you?" he asked without preamble, voice low enough that only I could hear. The simple acknowledgement nearly broke my careful composure. "Yes." He nodded, studying his whiskey rather than meeting my eyes. "Thought so. The technical explanations changed when you stopped giving them. Less precise, less elegant." His gaze drifted to where James and April laughed with investors. "Be careful, Celia. Success changes people, rarely for the better." Before I could respond, he moved away, leaving me with the first confirmation that someone else recognized what was happening. I attempted to rebuild alliances within the company, reaching out to longtime employees who remembered my role in creating Nexus. Most responded awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable discussing the subject. A few expressed sympathy, but admitted they weren't willing to risk their positions by contradicting the official narrative. Tech Fusion stock options were too valuable now, the job market too competitive. In January, I overheard developers discussing something called Nexus 2. A major platform update I knew nothing about. When I questioned my new supervisor, he looked startled. "I thought you were informed." "That's the strategic initiative April's team is driving with James. They've brought in consultants from McKinsey to direct the architecture updates." I stood perfectly still, absorbing this final betrayal. They were planning to modify my creation without even consulting me. The architecture I had painstakingly built, the code that bore the imprint of my mind and vision, would be altered by strangers who hadn't written a single line of the original. That evening, I found a preliminary specification document for Nexus 2 inches the company server. It described a complete reimagining of the platform under the original vision of James Miller, finally fully realized. The document was dated 3 months earlier. They had been planning this for a quarter without a single word to me, the actual creator of the system they were claiming to reimagine. I closed my office door, hands shaking with a combination of rage and clarity. The truth was undeniable. I had been systematically sidelined, my contribution erased, my creations stolen by the man who had once promised we would build something revolutionary together. He had kept that promise, but the revolution had been against me. The investor meeting in New York represented our biggest opportunity yet, a Series B funding round that would value Tech Fusion at over $800 million. For weeks, the office buzzed with preparations for the presentation that could cement our status as the next tech unicorn. Despite everything, I threw myself into preparing the technical roadmap. This meeting could be my opportunity to reassert my position as the architect behind Nexus. I developed comprehensive slides showing our platform's evolution and future capabilities, spending hours ensuring the technical details were both accurate and accessible to non-technical investors. The evening before our departure, I rehearsed my presentation segment in our home office. James leaned against the doorframe, watching with an unreadable expression. "You might want to simplify this," he said when I finished. "It's very technical." "It's a technical product," I replied. "Investors should understand what they're funding." He crossed his arms. "Actually, I've been thinking, it might be better to leave the technical details to the engineering team. Aaron can handle that portion." Aaron was a recent hire who'd been with the company less than 4 months. "I created Nexus," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "No one understands its architecture better than I do." "That's exactly the problem." James sighed as though I was being difficult. "You get too deep in the weeds. Investors need the big picture, the vision. That's what sells." "Your vision, not my actual work." His expression hardened. "This isn't productive, Celia. We'll talk about it tomorrow." I spent that night finalizing my slides, determined to present the work I had built. The investors deserved accuracy, not just vision, and I would provide it regardless of James's attempts to sideline me. The next morning, I arrived at the private airfield carrying my presentation materials and a small overnight bag. Our company's recently leased Gulfstream stood on the tarmac, its engines already humming. Through the windows, I could see figures moving about the cabin. As I approached the stairs, James appeared at the door, blocking the entrance. Behind him stood 3 board members and April, all carefully avoiding eye contact. "Celia." His smile was tight, professional, the smile he gave to competitors at industry events. "There's been a change of plans." "What change?" I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt on the open tarmac. "The jet seating is limited. We need room for the financial team and legal counsel." He gestured to where April stood watching our exchange. "Since we're focusing on investor relations rather than technical architecture, we've decided to streamline the delegation." "Streamline," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "And who will be presenting the technical roadmap?" "Aaron has it covered." His voice dropped, becoming more intimate, though no warmer. "Listen, this is a business decision, not personal. Only essential personnel for this trip." The calculation behind his eyes told me everything. I had become non-essential. To the presentation, to the company, to him. "Only family is allowed on this trip, Celia." He gestured to the group behind him. His new family of ambitious executives and complicit board members. April's smirk was unmistakable as she placed a hand on James's shoulder. 6 years of marriage, 4 years building his company, and countless nights developing the software that saved his business had apparently made me nothing more than an employee, and now, not even that. I nodded calmly and walked away. Little did James know, I still held the master key to everything he valued. The flight crew unloaded my luggage silently, their uncomfortable expressions confirming this wasn't a routine occurrence. I took my bags and walked to my car without looking back, though I felt James watching until I drove away. The 20-minute drive home passed in a blur of shock and humiliation. Our house, the modern glass and steel structure in Pacific Heights that James had insisted on buying when Tech Fusion's valuation hit $100 million, loomed empty and cold when I arrived. For the first time, I saw it clearly as a showcase rather than a home, designed to impress rather than comfort. I moved through the silent rooms, touching surfaces and objects that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else's life. In our home office, photos from happier times lined the shelves: our wedding day, the first office opening, the celebration when we landed our first major client. The progression of images revealed a pattern I hadn't noticed. James increasingly centered, myself gradually moved to the periphery, almost anticipating my literal removal today. Setting my presentation materials on the desk, I opened my laptop to check my email. A notification appeared. A message James had accidentally forwarded to my personal account rather than my work address. The chain included correspondence between him and Gregory Salinger, the company's lead counsel. My hands trembled as I read Gregory's carefully worded advice on optimal separation timing. James, per our discussion, I strongly recommend waiting until after the funding round closes to proceed with divorce filing. Introducing personal instability during negotiations could make investors nervous. Additionally, once the new valuation is established, the settlement discussion framework changes substantially in your favor. With the IP rights clearly established under your name in corporate documentation, her claim to Nexus would be significantly weakened. James's reply was brief. Agreed. We'll secure the funding with my revolutionary software first. Handle the paperwork discreetly in the meantime. My revolutionary software. I closed the laptop, a strange calm replacing the shock. The final betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal, calculated, and absolute. The man who had promised to build our dreams together had been systematically preparing to discard me for months. The numbness faded, replaced by something colder and more focused than anger. If James wanted a ruthless business decision, I would show him exactly what that looked like. I allowed myself exactly 1 hour to fall apart, 60 minutes of raw, unfiltered emotional release behind locked doors where no one could witness my pain. I screamed into pillows, broke a vase James had given me for our anniversary, and sobbed until my throat burned and my eyes swelled. Then I took a cold shower, changed clothes, and began to think with the same methodical precision I'd used to build Nexus. James had made a critical error in his calculations. He believed that because he controlled the narrative about Nexus, he controlled the software itself. But while he'd been building his public image as its creator, I had architected every line of its core functions. There were elements of the system known only to me. Administrative backdoors and master protocols built during those early development days when I was the only person working on the codebase. I spent the night reviewing my original architectural diagrams and code repositories, mapping the sections that had been modified by the development team, and identifying the core elements that remained my original work. The elegant simplicity of the design had protected it. Newer developers had built around my foundation rather than altering it, preserving my access points. At dawn, I turned to legal matters. My employment contract had been drafted in the early days when Tech Fusion was struggling, without the sophisticated IP protections typical of established companies. I had insisted on certain clauses that James, desperate for my help at the time, had readily accepted. These included retention of moral rights to my code contributions and specific acknowledgement of my role in creating the platform architecture. I needed expert advice. Jordan Pierce had been my roommate at MIT before becoming one of Silicon Valley's most respected technology IP attorneys. We'd remained friends over the years, though our contact had become less frequent as Tech Fusion demanded more of my time. "Can we meet today?" I asked when she answered my call. "Somewhere private. It's urgent and confidential." We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Oakland, far from any tech industry haunts. Jordan arrived in casual weekend clothes, her usual professional polish replaced by genuine concern when she saw my face. "You look like hell, Celia," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "What's going on?" I laid out the situation methodically, the gradual erasure of my contribution, the restricted access, the overheard plans for Nexus 2, and finally, the intercepted email about the divorce timing. Jordan's expression darkened as I spoke. "That manipulative son of a bitch?" she muttered, then immediately shifted to professional mode. "Do you have documentation proving your role in creating Nexus?" I nodded. Original design documents, early code repositories, emails discussing development, plus several early employees who could testify about my role if they were willing to risk their positions. "Your employment contract?" "Contains specific language about my authorship rights, though it grants usage license to the company." Jordan took notes as we spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "What about company ownership structure? Do you have equity?" 4% directly. Another 8% jointly with James, though I suspect he's been maneuvering to dilute that through the recent funding rounds. And the board members? Are any potentially sympathetic? I thought of Sam Walker and his quiet acknowledgement. One, possibly. Sam Walker. He's made comments suggesting he knows the truth about Nexus's development. Jordan tapped her pen thoughtfully. Here's what we're facing. A classic case of corporate gaslighting combined with marital betrayal. Unfortunately common in tech, especially with mixed personal and professional relationships. She leaned forward. The good news is, you've maintained better documentation than most, and your original contract has those moral rights provisions I've always recommended. The concerning part is timing. They're clearly planning to secure funding based on misrepresented IP ownership, then present you with a fait accompli. So what do I do? First, secure everything. All evidence, all access, all potential leverage. Second, prepare for independence, financially and physically. Third, identify exactly what you want from this situation. Revenge, recognition, financial compensation. The strategy changes based on your end goal. The question gave me pause. What did I want? The answer came with surprising clarity. Justice, recognition for creating Nexus, and protection from having my work twisted or degraded by people who don't understand it. Jordan nodded approvingly. Good. Clear objectives make for clear strategy. We spent the next 2 hours developing a plan that was both legally sound and technically leveraged. I would need to act quickly but carefully, balancing assertion of my rights against potential claims of corporate sabotage. Back home, I began methodical preparation. I created a secure private server to back up all documentation of my role in developing Nexus, including original design diagrams, code repositories, email chains discussing development, and meeting notes. Next, I compiled a timeline of the systematic erasure, changes to marketing materials, altered presentation slides, and revised company histories. I recorded the dates of my access restrictions and office relocation, noting contemporaneous emails that might reveal the intent behind these changes. While James was in New York, I used my still, functioning administrative credentials to generate comprehensive logs of the Nexus system architecture, creating a technical map that clearly demonstrated my original code at its foundation. These logs would provide irrefutable evidence of my role if examined by neutral technical experts. The most difficult task was personal, planning my exit from our shared home. I researched temporary housing options, settling on a furnished apartment in the Mission District available for immediate occupancy. The building offered robust security and excellent internet connectivity, essential for what would come next. While gathering financial documents from our home office, I discovered something unexpected: bank statements for an account I didn't recognize at a small bank in the Cayman Islands. Further investigation revealed a shell corporation named Apex Innovations, with regular transfers from Tech Fusion's research and development budget totaling nearly $2.4 million over 18 months. Most damning was a property deed for a beachfront villa in Belize, purchased by Apex Innovations 6 months earlier. The contract included a weather insurance policy listing 2 beneficiaries, James Miller and April Jensen. The embezzlement scheme was as sophisticated as it was brazen. Research funds were being channeled through fake development contracts to Apex, then used to purchase luxury real estate. The paper trail was thin but distinct, apparent only because I knew exactly where to look and how to connect the financial dots. I carefully documented everything, adding these findings to my growing evidence file. Then I secured temporary credit cards in my name alone and transferred my personal savings to a new account at a different bank. James had always insisted on maintaining the appearance of equality in our finances, meaning I still had substantial resources of my own. By nightfall, I had my plan fully formed. It would require perfect timing and execution, but the architecture was sound, just like Nexus itself. James had taught me one valuable lesson. In business, sentimentality was a weakness. I would not make the same mistake he had of underestimating my opponent. I arrived at the office early the next morning, projecting an air of business as usual. If colleagues noticed my reddened eyes or unusual quietness, they attributed it to being excluded from the New York trip. I spent the day finalizing routine code reviews and attending scheduled meetings, giving no indication of what was to come. Meanwhile, I tracked the company jet through my phone app. James and the board wouldn't return until late evening. The timing was perfect. At 5:30, I left the office with the usual exodus of employees. Instead of driving home, I went directly to my new apartment, where I'd already arranged delivery of essential supplies. The space was sparsely furnished but functional, a clean slate without memories or betrayal embedded in its walls. I set up my command center, 3 laptops with secure connections, external drives containing backup files, and printed documentation in case digital evidence became compromised. On the wall, I posted a timeline of necessary actions with precise triggers and contingencies. At 7, I received confirmation that the moving company had successfully transferred my personal belongings from our house to a secure storage facility. I had been selective, taking only what was unquestionably mine: clothes, books, personal mementos, and equipment purchased before our marriage. The movers had been instructed to record the condition of the house before and after their work, protecting me from claims of damage. At 8, I began the technical phase of my plan. Using administrative protocols known only to me, I executed a series of commands that secured critical functions of the Nexus software. These weren't destructive measures. I took care not to damage anything or disrupt service to clients. Instead, I implemented authentication requirements that only I could fulfill, essentially creating a silent deadman switch within the system. To an ordinary user, or even most administrators, the software would appear to function normally. Only when attempting to modify core architecture elements or override certain security protocols would the new protective measures become apparent. I was careful to document each step, ensuring my actions could be defended as protective rather than malicious. Next, I prepared communications to key stakeholders. To the board members, I drafted a detailed email outlining my concerns about misrepresentation of intellectual property and potential securities fraud in the upcoming funding round. The message was professional and factual, focusing on corporate governance issues rather than personal grievances. To the company's legal team, I sent a separate communication regarding intellectual property rights and the moral rights provisions in my original contract, attaching relevant documentation. The tone was collaborative rather than threatening, raising concerns rather than making accusations. Finally, I recorded a comprehensive video walkthrough of the original Nexus development, showing my original code and design documents, while explaining the evolution of the platform. This would serve as both evidence and explanation, impossible to dismiss as mere claims. Before sending anything, I consulted one last time with Jordan, via encrypted video call. She reviewed all materials, suggesting minor modifications to language and approach. Remember, the goal is to establish facts, not assign blame, she advised. Let the evidence speak for itself, and be prepared for immediate counterattack. They'll try to paint you as emotional, vindictive, or unstable. I'm ready, I assured her, and realized it was true. The shock and betrayal had crystallized into something harder and more focused. I wasn't acting from hurt, but from principle, the fundamental belief that creation deserved recognition and respect. While securing the final digital assets, I discovered additional evidence I hadn't been looking for. Buried in the financial systems were records of systematic diversion of research funds beyond the Belize property. Over 2 years, James and April had embezzled nearly $2.4 million, disguised as payments to non-existent development contractors and inflated vendor invoices. The pattern was clever but detectable to someone with both financial insight and technical understanding of the research budgets. I added this evidence to my documentation, recognizing it might prove more compelling to board members than intellectual property concerns. At 10:30, I received notification that James's flight had landed. I pictured him returning triumphant from New York, possibly with tentative funding commitments already secured. By now, he would be heading to our house, perhaps with April accompanying him under the pretense of continuing work discussions. I sent the prepared emails on a delayed delivery schedule, timed to arrive in the morning when recipients would be alert and focused. Then I implemented the final technical protocols securing Nexus and logged out of all company systems properly and professionally. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from James. "Where are you? We need to talk about your unprofessional behavior yesterday." I didn't respond. His calls began 30 minutes later, growing increasingly frequent and then stopping abruptly around midnight. I imagined him discovering the moved belongings, realizing something significant had changed. In my new apartment, I slept surprisingly well, waking refreshed for the first time in months. The weight of pretense had lifted, replaced by the clarity of decisive action. Whatever happened next, I had reclaimed agency in my own story. The final phase would begin when James discovered his access to Nexus had changed, which, given the morning developments in New York, wouldn't take long. I prepared for the confrontation, knowing it would be the most difficult but also most necessary step in establishing truth. By 8 the next morning, as board members and lawyers would be opening my emails, I was dressed in my most professional attire, a tailored navy suit that projected competence and stability. I had documentation organized, my presentation prepared, and my resolve firm. At 9:17, as predicted, my phone rang with James's name on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, activating the call recording function on my separate device. It was time to reveal that the creator still controlled her creation. "What the hell have you done?" James's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "Good morning, James. I assume you're having trouble with the Nexus system." My calm tone clearly unnerved him. "Fix it, now." The command was followed by the sound of frantic typing. "Whatever tantrum you're throwing needs to end immediately. Do you have any idea what's at stake?" "I do, actually. $800 million in Series B funding, based largely on intellectual property I created, but have been systematically denied credit for." His typing stopped. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted from anger to calculated charm, the tone he used to soothe nervous investors. "Celia, sweetheart, I understand you're upset about the New York trip, but this isn't the way to handle disappointment. The board is already concerned about your emotional stability. This will only confirm their doubts." Interesting perspective. I've just sent them quite different information, including documentation of my role in creating Nexus and evidence of nearly $2.4 million diverted to your shell corporation and the property you purchased with April. The silence that followed told me he hadn't expected this level of preparation. When he finally responded, the false warmth was gone, replaced by cold threat. "You signed an employment contract. Everything you developed belongs to Tech Fusion. If you don't restore full system access immediately, we'll sue you into oblivion. No company will ever hire you again. I suggest you review my contract more carefully, particularly the moral rights provisions and the specific language regarding my architectural contributions. I've taken no action that violates its terms. I've simply implemented authentication protocols that protect the integrity of my work." "Your work?" His laugh was harsh. "You were an employee doing what you were paid for. The board won't tolerate this sabotage." "It's not sabotage to protect what's rightfully mine from people who misrepresent its origins." I kept my voice steady, professional. The Nexus system continues to function perfectly for all legitimate business operations. Only attempts to override core architectural elements are restricted. "The board meeting is at 11. His tone shifted again. now almost pleading. Fix this before then, and we can discuss proper recognition for your contributions. A generous separation package. Maybe even public acknowledgement in the next release notes. The condescension in his offer was breathtaking, as though my life's work could be compensated with a footnote in a check. I'll see you at the board meeting, I replied. I assume my invitation won't get lost this time. I ended the call as he began another threat, then immediately contacted Jordan to alert her that events were proceeding as anticipated. She would join me at Tech Fusion headquarters as legal counsel. James's increasingly frantic messages continued through the morning, alternating between threats, manipulation, and occasional moments of apparent genuine panic as he failed to override my security protocols. Each attempt triggered additional authentication requirements, essentially locking him into a technical maze of his own creation. Jordan met me at a coffee shop near the Tech Fusion offices at 10:30. Her presence provided both legal protection and moral support as we walked together into the building where I had spent 4 years creating and then being erased. The atmosphere in the executive conference room was tense when we arrived. Board members sat rigidly around the polished table, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. James stood at the head of the table, his usual confident posture noticeably absent. April sat beside his empty chair, whispering urgently into her phone. Dr. Miller, Sam Walker, acknowledged me with a slight nod, using my academic title rather than my married name. The small sign of respect didn't go unnoticed by others at the table. You have no right to bring outside counsel to a private board meeting, James snapped, gesturing toward Jordan. Given that the emails I received this morning discuss both divorce proceedings and potential termination of my employment, I believe legal representation is not only appropriate but necessary. My voice remained calm and professional despite the tension crackling through the room. Before James could respond, Gregory Salinger, the company's chief counsel, intervened. She's correct. Under the circumstances, representation is her right. His expression suggested he'd already reviewed my documentation and found it concerning. This is corporate sabotage, James declared, addressing the board rather than me. My wife has become emotionally unstable due to personal issues and has locked critical company systems in some misguided attempt at leverage. That's a serious accusation, Jordan replied smoothly. Perhaps we should examine the evidence before making claims about either technical actions or emotional states. I connected my laptop to the conference room display and began a methodical presentation. First, I showed the original Nexus architecture diagrams with my signatures and timestamps, followed by early code repositories clearly documenting my role as creator. Next came the progression of marketing materials and investor presentations, showing how my contribution had been systematically minimized and eventually erased. The Nexus system remains fully functional for all legitimate business operations, I explained. I've simply implemented security protocols that prevent unauthorized modifications to the core architecture, protection that should have been in place from the beginning. She's lying, April interjected, her first contribution to the meeting. James created Nexus. She's just a jealous wife who can't handle his success. Interesting perspective from someone who's been embezzling company funds alongside him, I replied calmly, switching my presentation to the financial documentation. Perhaps you'd like to explain these transfers to Apex Innovations or the beachfront property in Belize purchased with research and development funds? April's face drained of color. Several board members leaned forward, suddenly far more interested in the financial records than the technical dispute. This is absurd, James sputtered. Complete fabrication. Apex is a legitimate research contractor. With no employees, no office, and no deliverables, I noted, displaying the shell company's sparse documentation. Whose only significant transaction was purchasing property with you in April, listed as beneficiaries on the insurance policy. The room fell silent as board members reviewed the evidence. James attempted to regain control, his voice rising as he made increasingly desperate claims about my mental state and technical incompetence. If Celia created Nexus, Why did none of you know that? Why has she hidden in the background all this time? He demanded of the board. Because she's making this up now. Trying to steal my life's work when she realized our marriage was failing. Actually, Sam Walker's quiet voice cut through James's tirade. Some of us did know. All heads turned toward the soft-spoken board member. I've been conducting an independent review of our technical infrastructure for the past 4 months, Sam continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Initially to assess scalability for the Series B round, but it revealed concerning discrepancies between public claims and internal documentation. He distributed copies of his report to each board member. The original Nexus architecture bears unmistakable hallmarks of Dr. Miller's coding style and approach, consistent with her previous work at Google. The elegance of the core systems couldn't have been created by someone without deep technical expertise. You've been investigating behind my back? James's face flushed with anger. It's called due diligence, Sam replied mildly. Standard practice before major funding rounds. I was going to present my findings after New York, but this morning's emails accelerated the timeline. He turned to me with genuine respect in his expression. What I didn't have until today was evidence of the financial irregularities, which unfortunately align with other governance concerns I've identified. April stood suddenly. This is a witch hunt. I don't have to listen to these accusations. She grabbed her handbag and stalked toward the door, only to find her path blocked by Gregory Salinger. I recommend you stay, Miss Jensen, he said quietly. Leaving now would complicate matters considerably. The meeting continued for 3 more hours as we methodically worked through the evidence. Technical documentation proved my role in creating Nexus beyond reasonable doubt. The financial records revealed a pattern of misappropriation that couldn't be explained away. Throughout, James's behavior deteriorated from confident dismissal to desperate deflection to barely controlled rage. When the financial evidence became irrefutable, he tried shifting blame entirely to April. When that failed, he resorted to personal attacks on my character and stability, tactics that only undermined his credibility further. The board eventually called for a private deliberation, asking James, April, and me to wait separately. I sat in my old office, now belonging to someone else, feeling strangely detached from the outcome. Whatever the board decided, I had spoken truth and reclaimed my creation. The rest was consequence, not objective. After 47 minutes, we were called back to the conference room. The atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Board members sat straighter, their expressions resolved rather than confused. After reviewing the evidence and consulting with legal counsel, the board has reached several conclusions, Sam announced as acting chair. First, we find the evidence of intellectual property misrepresentation compelling and concerning, particularly in light of pending investor discussions. James began to protest, but Sam continued without acknowledgement. Second, the financial irregularities involving Apex Innovations constitute a serious breach of fiduciary duty, requiring immediate remedial action and potential legal consequences. He turned to face James directly. Effective immediately, James Miller is removed as Chief Executive Officer of Tech Fusion. Company security will escort him from the premises following this meeting, and all access credentials will be revoked pending full investigation. April's name wasn't mentioned, but her ashen face suggested similar consequences awaited her. The marketing director stared fixedly at the table, already mentally drafting her resignation. Regarding Nexus, Sam continued, turning to me, we acknowledge the substantial evidence of Dr. Celia Miller's foundational role in creating the platform. We request restoration of standard system operations while legal determines the appropriate recognition and compensation for her contributions. I had prepared for resistance, threats, even termination. The board's swift action to address both the intellectual property theft and financial misconduct caught me by surprise. Before I could respond, Sam added something unexpected. Speaking personally, I believe Tech Fusion would benefit enormously from your continued involvement, Dr. Miller. If you're open to discussion, The board would like to propose terms for your remaining with the company in a capacity that properly recognizes your expertise and contribution. The offer was the one outcome I hadn't prepared for. Validation followed by invitation rather than ejection. Jordan and I exchanged glances, her slight nod confirming this created negotiating leverage rather than risk. "I'm willing to discuss possibilities," I replied carefully. "I care deeply about Nexus and its development, but trust has been severely damaged and would need to be rebuilt with concrete actions, not just words." "Understood. We'd like to begin that process immediately, if you're willing." As the meeting concluded, company security arrived to escort James from the building. His face contorted with fury as he shouted threats and accusations. April slipped out separately, her resignation email sent before she reached the elevator. "This isn't over," James snarled, as security guided him toward the exit. "You've destroyed everything we built." "No," I corrected him quietly as he passed. "I've reclaimed what I built. There's a difference." I watched him leave, feeling neither triumph nor vindication, only the somber recognition that both a marriage and a partnership had been built on shifting foundation, destined to collapse when truth emerged. Now came the harder part, deciding what to save from the wreckage, what to rebuild, and what to leave behind forever. The weeks following James's removal unfolded in a blur of activity. With Jordan's guidance, I negotiated comprehensive terms with the board. Chief Technology Officer position, a board seat, significant equity adjustment, and full public recognition as Nexus creator. Most importantly, I secured control over the platform's technical direction, ensuring no one could again distort or diminish my work. The legal team moved swiftly to recover embezzled funds, freezing the Belize property and Apex Innovations accounts. James faced potential criminal charges, though the board preferred quiet resolution to public scandal. April resigned immediately, avoiding direct accountability but permanently damaging her professional reputation. My first official act as CTO was implementing a complete security audit. The process revealed numerous vulnerabilities James had ignored and several backdoors he'd created to bypass normal oversight. Fixing these issues became my team's priority, alongside preparing for the delayed Series B funding round. Rebuilding TechFusion's internal culture proved more challenging than addressing technical problems. Years of James's leadership had fostered an environment of competition, secrecy, and credit stealing. Many employees remained skeptical of change, while others worried about company stability following such dramatic leadership turnover. I addressed these concerns directly, holding town halls where I answered questions honestly and acknowledged both past failures and future challenges. Gradually, trust began to rebuild, not through grand promises, but through consistent actions and transparent communication. Sam Walker became an unexpected ally in this transformation. As interim board chair, he supported my technical vision while handling investor relationships I had neither interest in nor aptitude for. Our complementary skills created a leadership partnership based on mutual respect rather than romantic entanglement. "You've done something remarkable," Sam noted 6 weeks after the confrontation. We were reviewing updated company valuation figures in my new office, the one that rightfully acknowledged my position. "Most people in your situation would have walked away or sought revenge. Instead, you've rebuilt something stronger." "I created Nexus," I replied simply. "I couldn't abandon it just because the person I trusted did." The divorce proceedings moved forward simultaneously with company restructuring. James initially contested everything, demanding half the company value despite his malfeasance. His position weakened considerably when the forensic accounting revealed additional financial misconduct predating the Apex scheme. "He's desperate," Jordan reported after a particularly contentious mediation session. "His legal team knows they have no leverage, but he keeps insisting they fight." Classic narcissistic response to consequences. He still can't believe the rules apply to him. Eventually, James accepted a settlement that provided financial security without the windfall he'd anticipated. The agreement included strict non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses, protecting both my reputation and the company from public attacks. The Series B funding proceeded 2 months later than originally planned. The delay proved beneficial, allowing us to present investors with cleaned financial records, strengthened governance, and a compelling technical roadmap. The resulting valuation exceeded our original target by 20%, validation that ethical leadership could coexist with business success. On the personal front, healing came more slowly. I maintained the small apartment in the Mission District even after I could afford something more substantial, appreciating its clean slate and absence of painful memories. Friends I'd neglected during my marriage gradually returned to my life, providing community I hadn't realized I'd been missing. 3 months after James's departure, TechFusion issued a press release announcing the official launch of Nexus 2. The document began with a clear statement. TechFusion is proud to announce the next evolution of our flagship integration platform, Nexus 2, building on the revolutionary architecture created by founder and chief technology officer, Dr. Celia Miller. Seeing my name finally associated with my creation brought unexpected emotion. This wasn't about ego, but about truth, the simple acknowledgement of creation and contribution that should have been fundamental from the beginning. The company thrived under new leadership. Without James's empire, building and financial schemes, we focused on product excellence and client relationships. Revenue grew steadily, and our reputation for technical innovation and integrity attracted both customers and talent. 6 months after the confrontation, I sat in my office reviewing quarterly results with Sam. Sunshine streamed through the windows, illuminating the San Francisco skyline beyond. The financial team just confirmed, "We've recovered nearly all the embezzled funds," Sam reported. "Minus legal costs, of course." "Good. Redirect it to the research division. They've earned some breathing room for innovation." Sam nodded, then hesitated before asking, "How are you doing, Celia? Really?" The question caught me off guard. Most people had stopped asking months ago, assuming the professional success had healed personal wounds. "I'm rebuilding," I answered honestly. "Some days are easier than others. I still question how I missed the signs for so long, whether I was willfully blind to who he really was." "Manipulative people excel at presenting whatever face serves their purpose," Sam observed, "especially to those closest to them. The question isn't why you didn't see it sooner, but what you did when you finally did." His words resonated with the lesson I'd been slowly learning. Recognition of my worth couldn't come from external validation. It had to be internally grounded, in my work, my integrity, and my courage to stand for truth even when standing alone. Later that afternoon, I met with a group of young female engineers recently hired from top universities. Their enthusiasm and brilliance reminded me of myself before doubt and erasure had dimmed my confidence. "What's your advice for women in tech?" one asked earnestly. "How do we make sure our contributions are recognized?" I considered the question carefully, wanting to offer something more substantial than platitudes. "Document everything," I began practically. "Keep records of your work, your ideas, your contributions. Not paranoidly, but methodically." They nodded, taking notes. "Build genuine allies, not just networks. Find people who value truth and excellence above politics." I thought of Sam, Jordan, and others who had recognized my work when it mattered most. "But most importantly," I continued, meeting each of their eyes in turn, "believe in the value of what you create. When you know your worth beyond question, no one can convince you to accept less than you deserve, whether in recognition, compensation, or respect." As they left, energized and determined, I turned to the window, watching the city transition from afternoon to evening. The reflection that looked back was different from the woman who had stood frozen on that tarmac 6 months earlier. Stronger, certainly, but also more authentic. I had lost a marriage, but reclaimed my creation, my voice, and myself. The journey had been painful, but the lesson was invaluable. Our greatest power isn't in controlling others, but in refusing to surrender control of ourselves, our work, our truth, and our worth. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself and your contributions when someone else tried to take credit? What did you learn from that experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May we all have the courage to protect what we create and the wisdom to recognize our true value.